close your eyes and imagine standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. Throughout human history, there have been moments when reality itself seems to pause, leaving behind questions that echo through the decades. Tonight, we'll explore some of these enduring mysteries, not to solve them, but to sit with them, to feel the quiet wonder they inspire. Our story begins in the winter of 1872, aboard a merchant vessel called the Mary Celeste. Picture the Atlantic Ocean, gray and restless beneath December skies. The ship was discovered drifting between the Azores and Portugal, her sails partially set, moving gently with the current. When Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Grazia came aboard to investigate, he found something that defied explanation. The Mary Celeste was completely abandoned. Not a soul remained on board. But here's what made it so strange. Everything was in order. The cargo of industrial alcohol was intact and secured. Personal belongings lay undisturbed in the crew's quarters. There was 6 months' worth of food and water. The ship's log sat open, with the last entry dated 9 days earlier, noting nothing unusual. A bottle of cough medicine stood on a table uncorked. A child's toys were scattered in one cabin. The captain had brought his wife and 2-year-old daughter on this voyage. The only things missing were the ship's navigational instruments, some papers, and the lifeboat. 10 people had simply vanished into the vast Atlantic, leaving behind their lives mid-sentence, as if they'd only meant to step away for a moment. Theories have swirled through time like morning mist. Some suggested a mutiny, but there were no signs of violence, no blood, no damage from struggle. Others wondered about piracy, but why would pirates leave behind valuable cargo and personal possessions? The alcohol cargo led some to speculate about fumes causing an explosion scare, prompting the crew to abandon ship temporarily. But the vessel showed no evidence of fire or explosion. The truth is, we'll never know what made 10 people decide to leave a seaworthy ship in the middle of the ocean. The Mary Celeste sails on through history as a ghost ship in the truest sense, not haunted by spirits, but by the absence of answers. Let's drift forward now, to the spring of 1948, and the Australian coastline. It was December, summer in the southern hemisphere, when a man's body was discovered on Somerton Beach in Adelaide. He was lying against the seawall, dressed smartly in a white shirt, tie, and brown suit, as if he'd simply decided to rest there and never woke up. But this was no ordinary death. The man had no identification. Every label had been meticulously removed from his clothing. His pockets held a train ticket, a bus ticket, some coins, and cigarettes of an American brand not commonly sold in Australia. An autopsy revealed that his internal organs showed signs of poisoning, yet no known poison could be detected in his system. His last meal, eaten 3 to 4 hours before death, had been a pasty, a simple meat pie. In the pocket of his trousers, investigators found a scrap of paper with 2 words printed on it: Tamam Shud. These words, they discovered, were from the final page of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of Persian poetry. The phrase means ended or finished. Somewhere out there was a book with this page torn from it, and they found it. A local man came forward with a copy of the Rubaiyat that had been thrown into his unlocked car around the time of the death. The final page was indeed torn out, but the mystery only deepened. On the back cover, someone had written a series of letters in pencil, appearing to be some kind of code. Below that, a phone number for a woman who lived nearby. When police contacted her, she claimed not to know the dead man. The witnesses said she looked frightened and seemed to recognize his photograph. She never spoke publicly about what she might have known. The code has never been deciphered. The man has never been identified. He lies in an Adelaide cemetery under a headstone that reads simply, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." Was he a spy caught in the shadowy games of the early Cold War? A tragic lover carrying his heartbreak to the sea? Someone who had carefully erased his identity for reasons we can only imagine? The Somerton man keeps his secret still, his story ending exactly as that torn page declared. Tamam should, as you settle deeper into comfort, consider how these mysteries connect. Both the Mary Celeste and the Somerton man share something profound. They are puzzles with missing pieces that can never be recovered. Time has moved on. Witnesses have passed away. Evidence has degraded or vanished. Some answers may have been simple in the moment, a panic decision, a private reason, but have become elaborate enigmas through the passage of years. Let your mind rest now on this thought. Perhaps some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They exist to remind us that the world still holds spaces that reason cannot fully illuminate, questions that sit quietly in the dark, patient and eternal. Sleep now, knowing that tomorrow the world will still hold its wonders, its secrets, its beautiful uncertainty. Let us drift now from the sea and the shore to the vast silence of the sky. In the summer of 1947, something fell from the heavens near Roswell, New Mexico, and with it fell a question that has never quite settled. A rancher named Mac Brazel was checking his sheep after a night of severe thunderstorms when he discovered debris scattered across his land. This wasn't ordinary storm wreckage. He found strange metallic fragments that wouldn't burn, thin as foil yet impossibly strong. There were wooden-like beams with unusual markings that resembled hieroglyphics, and a material that, when crumpled, would unfold itself back to its original shape without a single crease remaining. Brazel gathered some of the debris and brought it to the local sheriff, who contacted Roswell Army Airfield. The military arrived swiftly and collected everything from the ranch. Then, on July 8, 1947, the Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release that would echo through decades. They had recovered a flying disc. The local newspaper ran the headline. For one brief moment, it seemed the impossible had been confirmed. But the very next day, the story changed. A press conference was held where Brigadier General Roger Ramey displayed weather balloon debris and explained that this was what had actually crashed, a simple mistake in identification. The military showed reporters the remains of a weather balloon with a radar reflector, and the story was officially closed. For 30 years, it remained closed. Yet witnesses began to speak. Military personnel who had been at Roswell described being sworn to secrecy, threatened even, told never to discuss what they'd seen. Some claimed they'd handled materials unlike anything they'd encountered before or since. One mortician in town said he'd been contacted by the base, asking strange questions about small caskets and preservation techniques for bodies exposed to the elements. Rancher spoke of military convoys and a cordon that sealed off the area for days. In 1978, a retired Air Force officer named Jesse Marcel, who had been the intelligence officer sent to investigate the original debris, broke his silence. He stated plainly that what he'd held in his hands that day was not a weather balloon, that he knew what weather balloons looked like. And this was something else entirely. The debris he remembered was extraordinary, unlike any earthly material he'd encountered. What really fell near Roswell? Was it truly a weather balloon, or perhaps a classified military project, a high-altitude surveillance balloon from a secret Project Mogul, designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests? Or was it something that came from much farther away? something that would challenge everything we understand about our place in the universe. The desert keeps its counsel, and the truth, whatever it may be, remains buried beneath layers of classification, contradiction, and time. Let's journey now across the ocean and back in time, to the winter of 1960, in the Ural Mountains of Russia. 9 experienced hikers, students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, set out on a skiing expedition to reach Otorten Mountain. They were led by Igor Dyatlov, and the group was full of life, documented in photographs showing them laughing, preparing meals, trudging through snow. They were young, capable, and prepared for the harsh conditions. On February 1st, they made camp on the slopes of Kolet-Syakhl, a mountain whose name translates to Dead Mountain in the local Mansi language. That night, something happened that has defied explanation for over 6 decades. When the group failed to return as scheduled, a search party was dispatched. What they found at the campsite was deeply disturbing. The tent had been cut open from the inside, as if the hikers had slashed their way out in desperate panic. Footprints led away from the tent into the snow, some barefoot, some in socks, some in a single boot. The tracks suggested the group had left in an orderly fashion, not running chaotically, but walking in a line down the slope toward the forest. The first 2 bodies were found beneath a cedar tree at the forest's edge, nearly a mile from the tent. They were barefoot and dressed only in their underwear, despite temperatures of -25 to 30 degrees Celsius. They had died of hypothermia. Branches high up in the cedar tree were broken, suggesting someone had climbed up, perhaps trying to see something or escape from something. 3 more bodies were found between the cedar and the tent, including Igor Dyatlov himself. They appear to have been trying to return to the camp. All showed signs of hypothermia, but their state of undress made no sense. Why would experienced hikers, in the deadly cold, remove their clothing? The final 4 bodies weren't discovered until May, when the snow melted. They were found in a ravine further into the forest, and this is where the case became truly haunting. These bodies showed severe internal injuries. Ludmila Dubinina had major chest fractures, was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her upper lip. Alexander Zolotaryov and Alexander Kolevatov had significant chest trauma. The force required to cause such injuries was compared to that of a car crash, yet their external skin showed no corresponding damage, no major bruises, no cuts that would explain the internal trauma. Some of the victims' clothing showed traces of radiation, higher than normal background levels. The investigation report noted something peculiar. An unknown compelling force had caused the deaths. The case was closed quickly, officially attributed to a compelling natural force. But what natural force could explain everything they'd found? Theories have multiplied like snowflakes in a blizzard. An avalanche, some say, though experienced investigators found no evidence of one, and the slope wasn't steep enough for a typical avalanche. Military testing gone wrong. The area was relatively close to military installations. Infrasound from wind creating panic-inducing frequencies that drove them mad with fear. Paradoxical undressing, a known phenomenon where hypothermia victims feel burning hot and remove clothing. But this doesn't explain the internal injuries or the traces of radiation. The Dyatlov Pass incident, as it came to be known, remains one of the most analyzed and least understood events in modern history. 9 young people fled their tent into a deadly winter night, and something out there in the darkness and cold took them, one by one, leaving behind only questions frozen in time. Rest now with these mysteries settling around you like a soft blanket. The sky holds its secrets about what fell at Roswell. The mountains keep their silence about what happened on Dead Mountain. These stories don't need conclusions to be complete. They exist in the space between knowing and wondering, and in that space, let your mind find peace. As you sink deeper into comfort, let us travel now to the heart of the ocean, to a place where time itself seems to have stopped. In 1945, as World War II drew to its close, 5 Navy torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on what should have been a routine training mission. Flight 19, as it was designated, consisted of 5 TBM Avenger aircraft carrying 14 men, 13 crew members, and 1 passenger. The date was December 5th, and the weather forecast was favorable. The mission was straightforward, a navigation exercise that would take them east over the ocean, then north, then back southwest to base, a triangular route the pilots had flown many times before. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, an experienced pilot and instructor, led the formation. They departed at 2:10 in the afternoon, expecting to return before dinner. But something went wrong out there, over the azure waters of the Atlantic. At 3:45 p.m., roughly 90 minutes into the flight, a radio operator at the base picked up a transmission from Taylor. His voice carried confusion. Both of his compasses had malfunctioned. He believed they were somewhere over the Florida Keys, but nothing looked right. The islands below didn't match what he expected to see. Other instructors on the ground tried to guide him home, but the transmissions grew increasingly garbled and desperate. Taylor reported that the ocean didn't look right, a phrase that has echoed through the decades. He couldn't determine which way was west. Even the sun, sinking toward the horizon, seemed to confuse rather than orient him. The Flight 19 pilots could hear the base transmissions, but the base could barely hear Flight 19. It was as if some invisible curtain had fallen between them. As fuel ran low and daylight faded, the last transmissions were picked up by other aircraft in the area. The pilots of Flight 19 were heard discussing whether to ditch together or separately. Then, sometime after 7 p.m., the transmission ceased entirely. 5 aircraft and 14 men vanished into the gathering darkness. A massive search and rescue operation launched immediately. A Martin Mariner flying boat with a crew of 13 took off to search for the missing bombers. 23 minutes after takeoff, the Mariner itself disappeared. A ship in the area reported seeing an explosion in the sky at that exact time, suggesting the rescue plane may have suffered catastrophic fuel tank explosion. These aircraft were known to be vulnerable to such accidents, but no wreckage was ever found. In the days that followed, hundreds of aircraft and ships combed over 380,000 square miles of ocean and land. They found nothing, no oil slicks, no debris, no life rafts, no trace of 6 aircraft and 27 men. It was as if they had simply been erased from existence. Flight 19 disappeared in an area that would later become infamous as the Bermuda Triangle, a region bounded roughly by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. The triangle would collect stories like shells on a beach, ships found abandoned with meals still warm on tables, aircraft vanishing in clear weather with no distress calls, compasses spinning wildly, instruments failing without explanation. Was there truly something anomalous in that stretch of ocean? Some geomagnetic peculiarity? Some quirk of weather and current that conspired against travelers? Or is the Bermuda Triangle simply a heavily traveled area where the normal accidents of sea and sky are amplified by our desire to find patterns in chaos? The ocean holds Flight 19 still, somewhere in its depths, keeping one of aviation's most enduring mysteries. Let us turn now from the sea to the land, to a quiet English village called Rendlesham, near two military bases used by the United States Air Force. It was Christmas time in 1980, late December, when something descended into Rendlesham Forest that would be witnessed by numerous military personnel, trained observers, not prone to flights of fancy. In the early morning hours of December 26th, security patrol near RAF Woodbridge noticed strange lights descending into the forest. Thinking an aircraft might have crashed, they requested permission to investigate. Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston and Airman First Class John Burroughs were among those who entered the dark woods. What they described finding was no crashed aircraft. Peniston reported encountering a triangular craft, approximately 9 feet long and 6 feet high, sitting on 3 legs in a small clearing. The surface was smooth, warm to the touch, and covered with strange symbols that resembled hieroglyphics. The craft emitted a bright white light that seemed to illuminate the entire clearing without casting shadows in the normal way. As Peniston approached and touched the surface, he said he experienced a download of binary code flooding his mind, ones and zeros streaming through his consciousness, though he wouldn't understand this experience fully until years later. The craft then maneuvered through the trees, moving with impossible agility for something solid, and shot up into the sky. The entire encounter lasted approximately 45 minutes. When Peniston and Burroughs returned to the area in daylight, they found 3 impressions in the ground where the legs had been, arranged in a triangular pattern. The soil in these depressions was compacted, harder than the surrounding earth. The next night, December 27th, Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt led a team back into the forest to investigate. Halt brought a radiation detector, which showed elevated readings at the landing site and on nearby trees. As they documented the area, lights appeared again in the sky, moving, pulsing, splitting into multiple objects. Halt recorded everything on a portable tape recorder, his voice steady but tinged with disbelief as he narrated what he and his team were witnessing. One light appeared to send down beams toward the ground, near the weapons storage area of the base, a highly sensitive location where nuclear weapons were stored during the Cold War. The objects moved silently through the sky, performing maneuvers that defied conventional aircraft capabilities, then disappeared. What makes the Rendlesham Forest incident so compelling is the credibility and number of witnesses. These were military personnel, many with security clearances, trained to observe and report accurately. Halt wrote an official memorandum to the British Ministry of Defense detailing the events. Physical evidence was collected and documented, yet official explanations ranged from a nearby lighthouse beam creating illusions, to misidentified natural phenomena, to a series of meteors. But those who were there remained steadfast in what they experienced. Something came down in Rendlesham Forest during those December nights, something that left traces and memories that have never been adequately explained away. The forest remembers, and so do the men who walked through it that Christmas, their lives forever changed by an encounter with the inexplicable. As your breathing slows and deepens, picture these scenes. Aircraft vanishing into tropical twilight, their radio voices fading like distant music, strange lights moving through English pines while trained observers watch and wonder. These mysteries share something profound. They happen to ordinary people doing ordinary things, and suddenly the universe revealed itself as far stranger than they'd imagined. Let these stories carry you now toward sleep, knowing that the world holds more questions than answers, and that this vast uncertainty is not something to fear, but something that makes existence endlessly fascinating. Rest easy in the mystery. Let us drift now to the American frontier, to a time when the vast wilderness could swallow entire groups of people without a trace. In 1587, over 100 English colonists arrived on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. They came with hope, with supplies, with dreams of establishing a new life in the New World. Among them were families, men, women, and 17 children, including Virginia Dare, who would become the first English child born in the Americas. John White, the colony's governor and Virginia's grandfather, had led these settlers across the ocean, but circumstances forced him to return to England for additional supplies. When he departed in late 1587, he left behind his daughter, his infant granddaughter, and 114 other souls, promising to return swiftly. He told them that if they had to leave the settlement, they should carve their destination into a tree, and if they were in danger, they should carve a Maltese cross above it. But history had other plans. War between England and Spain made the ocean treacherous. Ships were needed for defense. Supplies couldn't be spared. Days turned to months, months to years. John White didn't return to Roanoke until August of 1590, 3 years after he'd left. When he finally reached the island, his heart must have pounded as he approached the settlement. But the village was empty. Not a single person remained. The houses had been dismantled carefully, systematically, not destroyed by violence, but taken apart as if the colonists had planned to relocate. Personal belongings of little value had been left behind, scattered and overgrown with weeds. But there were no signs of struggle, no bodies, no graves. On a wooden post at the entrance to the settlement, White found a single word carved in capital letters: Croton. On a nearby tree, the letters Ciaro had been carved. There was no Maltese cross, no sign of distress. Croton was the name of a nearby island, home to a Native American tribe that had been friendly to the English. It seemed a clear message: we have gone to Croton Island. White desperately wanted to sail there immediately to search for the colonists, for his family. The storm was approaching. His ship had already lost anchors in rough weather, and the crew was anxious to leave these dangerous waters. They promised to return in the spring to search Croton Island. But John White would never make that journey. He never saw his daughter or granddaughter again. No one did. The lost colony of Roanoke has sparked theories for centuries. Did they join the Croton tribe, integrating into Native American society? Some later reports spoke of Native Americans with gray eyes and European features in the region. Did they attempt to travel overland to the Chesapeake Bay area, as had been discussed, and perish along the way? Were they victims of disease, drought, or conflict with other tribes? Archaeological evidence remains frustratingly sparse. A few artifacts, tantalizing but inconclusive. What we know is this: 115 people vanished so completely that 400 years of searching has yielded no definitive answer. They left behind only a single word carved in wood, and that word has echoed through American history as a symbol of all the mysteries the wilderness can keep. Now let your mind travel forward in time, to the golden age of aviation, to July 2nd, 1937. Amelia Earhart, perhaps the most famous aviator in the world, was attempting something extraordinary: to fly around the world at the equator, covering 29,000 miles. She and her navigator, Fred Noonan, had already completed 22,000 miles of their journey, island hopping across South America, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. They departed from New Guinea on that July morning, bound for Howland Island, a tiny speck of land in the vast Pacific Ocean, barely a mile and a half long. It would be one of their longest and most difficult legs, 2,556 miles over open ocean. The Lockheed Electra aircraft was loaded with extra fuel tanks. They had radio equipment, though communication had been problematic throughout the journey. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca waited near Howland Island, ready to guide them in with radio signals. Throughout the flight, the Itasca received transmissions from Earhart. Her voice came through, often strong and clear, but the transmissions were brief and frustrating. She reported her position, mentioned overcast skies, asked for bearings. But she either couldn't hear the Itasca's replies or couldn't maintain contact long enough for effective two-way communication. Her last clear transmission came at 8:43 a.m. local time. We're on the line 157 to 337, running on line north and south. This referred to a navigational line of position. She indicated they were running low on fuel and couldn't see the island. Then, at 8:43 and again at 8:55, she transmitted, "We are running north and south." Those were the last words ever definitively heard from Amelia Earhart. The Itasca immediately began searching. The Navy and Coast Guard launched what would become the most extensive air and sea search in history up to that time, covering 250,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slicks, no sign that Earhart and Noonan had ever been there. Theories have multiplied like stars in the night sky. The official conclusion was that they ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific, the aircraft sinking quickly in the deep waters near Howland. But other possibilities have been explored endlessly. Did they crash land on Gardner Island, now called Nkomororo, an uninhabited atoll southeast of Howland? Expeditions have found artifacts there that could have belonged to a castaway from that era. Fragments of a woman's shoe, a piece of plexiglass consistent with an Electra's window, even bones that were lost before modern DNA analysis could be performed. Another theory suggests they were captured by the Japanese, who controlled many Pacific islands and were sensitive about foreigners flying near their territories in the years before World War II. Some claim to have seen a female pilot and male navigator in Japanese custody, though no concrete evidence has ever emerged from Japanese records. The more you examine the evidence, the more the mystery deepens rather than clarifies. Every answer creates new questions. Was that piece of aluminum found on the Nkomororo from Earhart's plane or from a different aircraft? Were those radio distress signals picked up in the days after her disappearance genuine, or were they atmospheric anomalies? The ocean that Earhart loved, that gave her such freedom, may have claimed her in the end, keeping her story as one of its own. What remains is this: somewhere in the Pacific, beneath waves or buried in coral sand, lies the answer to one of the 20th century's most enduring questions. Amelia Earhart flew into history and never returned, her final resting place as unknown as the horizon she chased. Close your eyes now and feel the weight of these mysteries settling gently around you. The colonists of Roanoke, carving their message before walking into history. Amelia Earhart, her voice growing fainter over the radio until it vanished into static and silence. These are not just unsolved cases. They are reminders that some journeys end in places we cannot follow, that some travelers pass beyond the reach of our understanding. Let sleep come now, as natural and inevitable as the tide. Let these stories fade into the background like distant radio transmissions, their words blending into the static of dreams. Tomorrow will bring its own mysteries, its own wonders, but tonight, rest in the company of questions that have no answers, and find peace in not knowing. As you settle deeper into stillness, let us journey now to the cobblestone streets of Victorian London, to a fog-shrouded autumn in 1888. In the impoverished district of Whitechapel, where narrow alleys twisted like mazes and gas lamps cast pools of uncertain light, someone was hunting. The victims were women, marginalized by society, working the streets to survive. Between August and November of 1888, at least 5 women were murdered in a manner so brutal that the crime shocked even a city accustomed to violence and poverty. Marion Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. These names would become forever linked to one of history's most infamous unknown killers. What made these murders so haunting was not just their brutality, but their precision. The killer possessed knowledge of human anatomy, making incisions and removing organs with what appeared to be surgical skill. The murders escalated in their savagery. The final victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was killed indoors, giving the murderer time and privacy, and the crime scene was described as almost incomprehensible in its horror. The killer taunted authorities. Letters arrived at newspapers and police stations, some believed to be genuine, others clearly hoaxes. One letter, received by the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, came with half of a human kidney, supposedly from victim Catherine Eddowes. The writer claimed to have fried and eaten the other half. The letter was signed with a name that would echo through history: Jack the Ripper. Despite the largest police investigation London had ever mounted, despite thousands of interviews and hundreds of suspects, the killer was never caught. The murders simply stopped as mysteriously as they had begun after November 1888. Some believe the Ripper died, was institutionalized, or left London. Others think he continued killing elsewhere, his crimes unconnected by investigators who didn't yet understand the concept of serial murder. Over the decades, dozens of suspects have been proposed. There was Montague John Druitt, a barrister and teacher whose body was found in the Thames weeks after the final murder. Did guilt drive him to suicide? Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant with documented mental illness, identified years later by a witness, but never charged. Some theories reached into the highest levels of society, suggesting royal physicians or even members of the royal family itself, though these claims lack credible evidence. Modern investigators have applied new techniques to the old mystery: DNA analysis of letters and evidence, geographical profiling, psychological profiling. Yet Jack the Ripper remains as elusive now as he was in the gaslit nights of 1888. The fog that shrouded Whitechapel has never quite lifted from this case, and the identity of the killer remains one of history's most debated mysteries. Let us move forward now through time, to the cold December of 1948, and a different kind of mystery. In the Hagley Wood near Birmingham, England, 4 boys were hunting for birds' nests when they discovered something inside the hollow trunk of a wych elm tree. At first, they thought it was an animal skull. Then they realized it was human. Police investigation revealed a complete skeleton wedged into the hollow tree. The body was that of a woman, and she had been placed there while the tree was still living, the bark growing over the opening, sealing her inside. She was approximately 35 years old, about 5 feet tall, with irregular teeth and one hand missing. Fragments of clothing suggested she had been dead since around 1941, during the height of World War II. Creosote had been poured into the tree hollow, possibly to accelerate decomposition or mask the smell. A piece of taffeta fabric was found lodged in her mouth. She may have been suffocated or gagged. But who was she? Despite extensive investigation, dental records, and missing persons reports from the war years, she was never identified. In 1943, no DNA testing existed, no sophisticated forensic techniques that we take for granted today. Then something strange began happening. Graffiti started appearing on walls throughout the Midlands. Who put Bella in the Wych Elm? Later variations asked, who put Lubella in the Wych Elm? The messages continued appearing for decades, suggesting someone knew something about the woman's identity, or wanted people to believe they did. Theories emerged from the wartime shadows. Was she a spy? Britain was riddled with espionage during the war, and the area near Hagley Wood was home to military installations and factories. Some suggested she was part of a black magic ritual. A hand missing, the body hidden in a tree. Certain occult groups were known to be active in the region. Others believed it was a domestic crime, a murder hidden in the chaos of wartime when people disappeared regularly and investigations were hampered by blackouts and rationing. But Bella, as she came to be known, kept her secrets. The tree has long since been removed, but her skeleton rests in storage, waiting for technology or information that might finally give her back her name. She remains the woman in the tree, a mystery wrapped in bark and time. Now let your thoughts drift across the Atlantic once more, to San Francisco in October of 1969. A different kind of predator was hunting in California. One who killed, then wrote letters to newspapers, taking credit and taunting police. He called himself the Zodiac. The Zodiac's confirmed victims were young, couples seeking privacy in lovers' lanes, a taxi driver working a night shift. The killer would strike suddenly, with a gun or a knife, then disappear into the California night. But what set the Zodiac apart was his desire for attention and recognition. He sent letters to newspapers, filled with details only the killer would know, demanding they be published on the front page. He threatened to kill more if his letters weren't printed. The letters contained ciphers, encrypted messages that the Zodiac challenged readers to solve. One cipher, received in August 1969, was solved within a week by a schoolteacher and his wife. It read, in part, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." But other ciphers have remained unsolved for decades, until 2020, when amateur codebreakers finally decrypted a message sent in 1969. It took 51 years to read his words. I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me. The Zodiac claimed 37 victims in his letters, though police confirmed only 7 attacks, 5 of which were fatal. After 1974, the letters stopped. The Zodiac vanished as mysteriously as Jack the Ripper had 80 years earlier. Was he caught for another crime? Incarcerated under a different name? Did he die? Did he simply stop? His need for attention finally satisfied or exhausted? Suspects have been investigated and eliminated over the decades. Arthur Lee Allen was the prime suspect for years. Circumstantial evidence pointed toward him, but nothing definitive, and he died in 1992 before charges could be filed. Partial DNA from the stamps on the Zodiac's letters has been extracted, but it may have been contaminated or may have come from someone else who handled the envelopes. The Zodiac case remains open in multiple jurisdictions across California. Someone out there knows the truth. Perhaps the killer himself lived out his life in anonymity. Perhaps someone recognized the handwriting in those letters, but never came forward. Perhaps the answer lies buried in some archive, waiting to be discovered. As your breathing becomes slower, more rhythmic, let these mysteries wash over you like gentle waves. Jack the Ripper, walking through fog into immortal infamy. Bella, sleeping in her wooden tomb for years before being found. The Zodiac, his final cipher still unbroken, his identity still hidden behind a mask and a symbol. These stories remind us that history is not a complete record, that the past contains gaps and silences where answers should be. But there is something almost comforting in that incompleteness. It means the world is larger than our knowledge of it. That mystery is woven into the very fabric of human experience. Let yourself rest now in this uncertainty. Let the questions remain questions. The mysteries remain mysteries. Sleep comes not with answers, but with acceptance. Acceptance that some things are unknowable, and that this unknowing is not a failure, but simply the nature of existence. Breathe deeply. Let go. Dream of fog-shrouded streets and hollow trees, of coded messages written by hands we'll never identify. Tomorrow will come with its own certainties and doubts, but tonight, rest in the beautiful, peaceful mystery of it all. As you sink further into tranquility, let us travel now to the frigid waters of the North Atlantic, to April 14th, 1912. The RMS Titanic, the largest and most luxurious ship ever built, was on her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York City. She was declared unsinkable by her builders, a floating palace of Edwardian elegance, carrying over 2,200 souls, first-class millionaires, third-class immigrants seeking new lives, and the crew who served them all. At 11:40 p.m., in calm seas beneath a moonless sky brilliant with stars, the Titanic struck an iceberg. The collision seemed almost gentle, a grinding, scraping sound that many passengers barely noticed. Some even played with the ice that fell onto the forward deck, tossing pieces back and forth like snowballs. But beneath the waterline, the iceberg had opened the ship's hull like a can opener, flooding compartment after compartment. The great ship had only enough lifeboats for about half of those aboard, a decision based on outdated maritime regulations that calculated capacity by tonnage rather than passenger count. As the bow sank lower and the stern rose higher into the night air, lifeboats were launched half empty. Some officers didn't believe the ship could actually sink. Some passengers refused to leave, unable to accept that this marvel of engineering could be defeated by ice. By 2:20 a.m., just 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision, the Titanic broke apart and slipped beneath the waves. Over 1,500 people went into the freezing water. Those in lifeboats heard the cries of the drowning, a sound that survivors would describe as haunting them for the rest of their lives. Within minutes, the cries fell silent as hypothermia claimed those in the water. But here's where the mystery begins, woven through the tragedy. Multiple ships in the area that night reported seeing strange lights and rocket flares, the Titanic's distress signals. The SS Californian was stopped in the ice, barely 10 miles away. Her radio operator had gone to bed at 11:30 p.m., just minutes before the Titanic struck the iceberg. Crew members on the Californian's deck saw rockets in the distance, white rockets, exactly what the Titanic was firing as distress signals. Yet the Californian did nothing. Captain Stanley Lord later claimed they thought the rockets were merely company signals, that the ship they could see in the distance was a different vessel, not the Titanic. When the Californian's radio operator came back on duty in the morning and learned of the disaster, they steamed toward the position, but by then it was far too late. Could the Californian have saved hundreds of lives? The question has been debated for over a century. Official inquiries condemned Captain Lord for not responding. Later investigations have been more sympathetic, suggesting atmospheric conditions that night might have created mirages, making distances impossible to judge accurately. Perhaps the lights they saw weren't the Titanic at all. but another ship entirely, a vessel that has never been identified, that was somehow between the Californian and the Titanic, that disappeared from history without explanation. Some witnesses spoke of a ship with unusual lights, closer to the Titanic than the Californian, that seemed to deliberately sail away as the great liner sank. Was there a mystery ship that night? A vessel engaged in illegal activities, smuggling, perhaps, that couldn't risk stopping to help without revealing itself? The question remains unanswered, lost in the dark waters of that April night. Now let us drift to the forests of the Pacific Northwest, where for decades people have reported encounters with something that shouldn't exist. Native American tribes have stories going back centuries. The Sasquatch, the wild man of the woods, a creature that walks upright like a human but stands 7 to 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair, powerful and elusive. In 1958, a bulldozer operator named Jerry Crew, working in Humboldt County, California, found enormous footprints around his equipment, 16 inches long, deeply pressed into the earth. He made plaster casts of the prints and brought them to the local newspaper. The story spread, and the creature gained a new name, Bigfoot. Since then, thousands of sightings have been reported across North America. Witnesses described the same general features: a massive bipedal creature, human-like but far larger and stronger, covered in hair, often emitting a terrible smell. Many sightings occur in remote wilderness areas, logging roads, mountain passes, forests far from human habitation. Witnesses include hunters, hikers, forest rangers, people experienced with wildlife, who insist that what they saw was no known animal. In 1967, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin captured footage in Bluff Creek, California, that would become the most famous evidence of Bigfoot's existence. The film shows a large, hair-covered figure walking across a sandbar, turning to look at the camera before disappearing into the trees. The creature's gait is unusual, a compliant gait, biomechanics experts have noted, different from a human's walk. The film has been analyzed frame by frame for decades. Some claim it's clearly a person in a suit. Others argue that the proportions, the muscle movement visible beneath the fur, the sheer size, are impossible to fake with 1967 technology. Hair samples have been collected that don't match any known animal. Footprints continue to be found, some showing dermal ridges, fingerprint-like features in the skin that would be extraordinarily difficult to fake. Audio recordings capture howls and screams that wildlife experts cannot definitively attribute to any known species. Yet no body has ever been found, no bones, no definitive proof that would satisfy the scientific community. How could a breeding population of large primates exist in North America without leaving clear evidence? Skeptics point out that we have trail cameras throughout forests now, that wilderness areas are more accessible than ever, that if these creatures existed, we would have found incontrovertible proof by now. Believers counter that the forests are vaster than we imagine, that these creatures are intelligent enough to avoid detection, that absence of proof is not proof of absence. Perhaps Bigfoot is an unknown primate, a remnant population of Gigantopithecus, an extinct ape that stood 10 feet tall and lived in Asia until about 100,000 years ago. Perhaps it's an elaborate hoax that has taken on a life of its own. Or perhaps it's something else entirely, a phenomenon that exists at the edges of human perception, real to those who encounter it, but always just beyond the reach of conclusive documentation. Let your mind wander now to the Australian outback, to January 16th, 1966, and the Beaumont children. Jane, aged 9, Arna, aged 7, and Grant, aged 4, were siblings who lived in Adelaide. On that summer morning, their parents allowed them to take a bus to Glenelg Beach, a trip they had made before. It was a sunny day, perfect for swimming. The children were well behaved, responsible for their ages. They were expected home by 2 in the afternoon, but they never came home. Multiple witnesses saw the children at the beach that day, playing near the water, buying food from a shop with money that wasn't the change they'd been given, suggesting someone had given them additional coins. Several people reported seeing the children with a tall, thin man with blonde hair, playing with them in an unusually familiar way. The man was seen adjusting Jane's bathing suit, helping them change clothes. One witness, postman, saw the 3 children walking away from the beach with this man, up Jetty Road. They appeared to be with him willingly, chatting and relaxed. Then they simply vanished. Despite one of the largest police investigations in Australian history, despite nationwide attention and countless tips, Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont were never found. The case devastated Australia. Children who had previously been allowed independence suddenly weren't. Parents who had thought their communities were safe realized that evil could strike anywhere, that their children could disappear in broad daylight from a crowded beach. The Beaumont parents never moved from their home, keeping the same phone number for decades in case their children tried to call. They lived the rest of their lives suspended in that terrible moment, waiting for news that never came. Suspects were investigated, the most notable being a man named Harry Phipps, a local factory worker who had known the family. Years later, evidence suggested he might have been involved, but he died in 2004 before conclusive proof could be gathered. Excavations based on tips have found nothing. The Beaumont children remain lost, their fate unknown, their disappearance a wound in the collective memory of an entire nation. Close your eyes now and feel the weight of these mysteries settling like a gentle blanket. The Titanic, slipping beneath dark waters while a mystery ship sails away. Bigfoot, glimpsed briefly before melting back into ancient forests. 3 children, walking up a sunny street and vanishing into nowhere. These stories share a common thread. They occurred in plain sight, witnessed by others, yet remain inexplicable. The world around us is not always as solid and knowable as we assume. Sometimes reality has gaps, moments where the normal order of things seems to pause and let something strange slip through. Let sleep come now, natural and irresistible. Let these mysteries fade into the background of your consciousness, becoming part of the landscape of dreams. Tomorrow holds its own certainties and questions, but tonight, rest in the mystery, rest in the not knowing, rest in the vast, beautiful uncertainty that makes life so endlessly fascinating. Breathe deeply. Let go. Drift into dreams where icebergs shimmer under starlight, where forests hold secrets, where children laugh on sunny beaches, before walking into history's unanswered questions.